The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says the death toll from the war with Israel has surpassed 19,000, but independently verifying these numbers is difficult, with many journalists and human rights workers having fled the territory and outside access severely restricted. Now, despite the challenges in documenting the dead, the UN says civilian casualties are unprecedented. Just a warning, our next report contains some distressing images.
Counting the dead. An already gruesome job made almost impossible by on-the-ground fighting, the relentless bombardment of Israeli forces, and the sheer chaos of war.
They are targeting children, as you can see. That's what happened. 2 missiles from F-16s hitting little children.
The human toll of the fighting is often conveyed by witnesses and by overworked doctors. Repeated blackouts mean social media is sometimes their only way to give updates.
No longer able to provide surgeries at Ali Hospital. The hospital is now effectively a first aid station. Hundreds of wounded now at hospital with no access to surgery. They will die from their wounds.
An official toll of casualties is being kept by the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza. Its latest update said Israel's offensive had killed more than 19,000 Palestinians. The Hamas-run ministry doesn't differentiate between civilians and combatants, but has said that most of those killed were women and children.
Secretary General, for this.
The United Nations has backed this claim, despite stated verification challenges.
What is clear is that we have had, in a few weeks, thousands of children killed. So this is what matters. We are witnessing a killing of civilians that is unparalleled and unprecedented in any conflict since I am Secretary General.
Not yet included in the official death toll are the thousands of people who are missing and feared dead under the rubble. When or if they are recovered, officials in Gaza will have to figure out where to bury them. Cemeteries are either full or inaccessible because of fighting. An unknown number of bodies has been buried in mass graves.
Therese Patterson is the project leader at the Uppsala Conflict Data Program, with the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry reporting more than 19,000 Palestinian deaths. I asked her earlier how confident we can be that this number is accurate.
Well, the numbers reported by the Gaza Ministry of Health have been shown to be rather accurate and precise in earlier phases of this conflict, when, for example, the UN has been able to conduct their own investigations later on. So we have no reason to believe that the ministry is not telling the truth this time. One should remember that it's extremely hard to gather real-time data in the midst of war. Communication channels are disturbed, internet is down. So I'm not surprised if these numbers are revised later on, both downwards could be because of double counting, but more likely upwards when more bodies are found under the rubble and people have been buried hastily in mass graves, for example. But we have no reason to believe that these numbers are exaggerated in any way.
Gazan authorities don't distinguish between combatants and civilians when giving these numbers, but Israel estimates that around 5,000 Hamas militants have been killed since October 7th. Is it possible to verify this?
I wouldn't say that it is at this point. As you said, the health ministry does not distinguish between civilians and combatants. We know that a big proportion is women and children, so we can assume that those at least are civilians. But we cannot really trust Israel because they, on the other side, has an interest in over-reporting insurgents and under-reporting civilian casualties. So this is just one of the things that we have to accept that we cannot know right now, but that will become clearer as time passes. And like I said, it's really hard in real time to get accurate data from war zones.
Yet I would like to talk about your work right now, because the Uppsala Conflict Data Program has been recording the death toll in global conflict since 1989. So how has the limited access to Gaza made this more difficult since October 7th and, maybe even before that?
Well, it's definitely a problem. And I mean, we collect data, we collect preliminary data on a monthly basis, but we also have our yearly data, which is more thoroughly investigated. So we are used to the situation that information becomes clearer as time passes, and we always go back and revise the data as well. And actually, Israel and the Palestine conflict is one of the best covered conflicts in the world historically. So this is one of the conflict zones that we get the most detailed information from. In many areas of the world, it's much harder. So this is not a new thing. It's not unique for this conflict at all. But we work a lot with different types of sources, trying to triangulate different types of information using social media and NGOs and different news media to be able to get a sense of what's going on.
Now that you mentioned social media, this is, of course, also a war of images, a war of words, a propaganda war of sorts as well. How much does that complicate your work?
Of course, it's really hard. And again, it's not unique to this conflict at all. We always need to be aware of where does the information come from originally, and that actor has an interest in portraying this conflict in a certain way. And also with video images, we need to be really careful. It's been shown in this conflict and in Ukraine, for example, and many other conflicts as well, that videos that were released as evidence of something going on in the conflict was in fact from a video game. So this information flow that we have right now is, of course, we need to be cautious and really be careful about trying to check where the information comes from and if we can trust that source.
That was Therese Patterson, project leader at the Uppsala Conflict Data Program in Uppsala in Sweden. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Joe Dyke is lead investigator at Air Wars, a non-profit that tracks civilian casualties in conflicts. Welcome to DW. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says more than 19,000 Palestinians have died in Israeli attacks, civilians and fighters. Can you confirm that number?
Thank you, first of all, for having us. No, we can't confirm that number explicitly, but I think it's worth putting it in context of there are two major trends here. One is, as you said earlier, human rights workers, journalists, etc., are not able to operate in Gaza, and the context, and then international journalists have been prevented from entering by the Egyptian authorities and by the Israeli authorities. So you have this huge gap of information, and then you have a dispute, an unprecedented dispute over the numbers. And as you say, can you confirm these numbers is a very difficult thing to do. But broadly, what we can say is, so we as an organisation are tracking all allegations of civilian harm, but every incident goes through a 5 or 6 stage review process, so it takes a long time. We've published more than 100 incidents already, of more than 1,600 that we have monitored, meaning that have been that need to be assessed and reviewed. So it's a long, slow process. What we can say is that in those 100 that we have published and that have been through the full process, we're also cross-checking them with the details that were released by the Ministry of Health, the Palestinian Ministry of Health, that released the names of 7,000 victims. We're cross-checking them with those, and broadly we're finding that the names that we are finding in a completely different methodology are the same as those released by the Palestinian Ministry of Health, or many of them are the same. So broadly we're finding that those methodology and those figures that have been released by the Ministry of Health, we're finding them broadly consistent, but we can't say that the 19,000, it will just take us a long, long time to do that process.
In general, what about the proportion of civilians in those numbers?
Yeah, I think, again, it will take a long time to make full assessments, but I think what we can say is, so Air Wars as an organisation has been tracking civilian harm in conflicts for a decade, so in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Ukraine in the last year. And one thing that we can say for certain here is that we're seeing far more incidents of entire families killed in their homes together than we have seen in other contexts. That doesn't necessarily, talking about full. It would take a long time to have full assessments. The Israeli military says that it assesses that two civilians have been killed for every militant. It's very hard to objectively judge that. I have no idea what methodology they reached that conclusion. But what we can say is that the number of cases of entire families killed is unlike anything we have monitored in other conflicts, and therefore that indicates that there's very large civilian harm incidents. Jabalia, for example, there was an attack on the refugee camp where we individually monitored more than 100 specific civilians that were killed in that incident. Again, with the attack on Al-Taj, which is a residential building in northern Gaza, we tracked more than 100 civilians killed in that incident as well. So you're seeing huge incidents in which many civilians are killed in one case.
Do your assessments go as far as pinpointing or holding accountability to, which side is to blame in all of this?
They do to a certain extent. We're obviously, that absolute certainty requires people on the ground looking at munitions remnants, and that's true wherever you are in the world, whatever conflict you're looking at. I think in the context of something like Jabalia or something like Al-Taj, there is no ability. Nobody else in this conflict has the ability to destroy a building, a 12-story building in one go. There's just, the Israelis even accept that they carried out Jabalia, and they accept that they carried out Al-Taj. So, there's not in certain incidents they accept it. I think in general it will take a long time to be certain on every incident as to whether it is whether it could have been Palestinian rocket fire. We in 2021 monitored all civilian harm from in the war there, and we found that around at least 151 civilians were killed by Israeli strikes, and 15 were killed by Palestinian misfire. So that that gives you some indication.
Okay.
But I think it will take a long time to be certain on that. But I think there's certainly an overwhelming power in the sense of military capacity and impact is the Israeli military forces.
Joe Dyke there, head of the Investigations and Accountability Unit at Air Wars. Thank you.